Hi guys, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Lululemon is Talking Mental series, where we talk with incredible people to raise awareness around mental health. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about enhancing performance, and I'm super excited to introduce my guest, Karen Lowe, sports psychologist, and Camille Cheng, Olympic swimmer for Hong Kong. How are we doing, guys?
Good.
Thank you for having us.
It's important for us to realize that we've done a few episodes already. We've talked about Mental Health 101, how to identify the tips of when the red flags are coming up, how to overcome challenges, how to bring self-awareness to yourselves. But I really wanted to talk with you guys because what's really important is people think from mental health, you're going to get from negative to zero. But actually, you can use mental health tips to increase it and get into the positive and help people like Camille be able to enhance their performance. So I guess we can start with that question, right? Mental health is such a complicated topic, but from your perspective, how can athletes benefit from using sort of mental tools, if you will?
Well, first of all, I think there's a lot of factors that could influence performance. One of them is psychology. I mean, they're all equally important. And I think psychology is the one thing that we don't train in Hong Kong. And so I would say that it is important. There's a lot of athletes who don't really care about the mental game. And in the end, when their performance isn't that great, coaches usually say, oh, it's because of your confidence, or, oh, it's because you didn't focus. Well, so you should train harder. But then training harder just means the physical aspect and not so much the mental aspect.
Right.
And so I would argue that we would also need to get the athletes to train their confidence levels. It would also be ideal for athletes to train their concentration levels, etc.
Yeah, Camille, I can hear you like smiling. You're like, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit on that? Have you heard that from your coaches before, and what does that mean?
When I was growing up in Asia, it was just all about like physical training and, do more. And I think it wasn't until I went to the US where I had a very different perspective on training, where I saw that it was, you put in the physical work, but that the thing that makes the difference is when you train your mind as well. Like we talk about training your physical muscles, but what about your mental muscle? Definitely in the later half of my career, and what I'm still working a lot on now is more this mental component. Like when the physical component is good, what is the extra thing from good to great? And I think that lies more in the mental aspect.
So what are some examples of tools that you've been working on to help you go from good to great?
The first thing is just recognizing that it's there. I think for a long time, it was hard for me to even think of like, okay, maybe I do need to see a sports psychologist, or maybe, I could feel these things like, oh, I get on the block and I feel nervous. I'm not even paying attention to my own race. And I'm thinking like, what is my competitor doing? And I'm like, how is this healthy? Like, why am I wasting all this energy on other people when this should be about me? I've worked hard, but when I get to the time to race, it's like, I'm letting it go to other people. So a lot of the work I've been doing is working on what I can control. And that goes from, having a pre-race routine. So that gives me confidence. That keeps my focus on what I need to do. And then a lot of work on visualization and imagery. How do I imagine my race to be? And also practicing different scenarios. Like sometimes things don't go well. And, there's times like you visualize something going perfect. And then if it doesn't happen, how do you respond to that? So I think these are just a few things for me that I've been working on.
Yeah. Do you see that a lot in the athletes that you deal with, Karen? And like, what are some of the challenges you face as a psychologist when you're working with an athlete with regards to them overcoming that mental hurdle?
I can totally relate to what Camille just said about not being able to conserve our own energy before a race. I used to be an athlete myself. I was actually also a swimmer. So I was always focused on the other competitor. And I'm obviously not alone in this situation. I think there's a lot of athletes that I work with also face the same problems. But another challenge that I also find in Hong Kong is that there are a lot of athletes who don't really know why they're doing their sport. I think we always say we need to know our why, like why we started and all that. But in Hong Kong, in the sport culture that we're in, there's a lot of parents who help their kids enroll in their sport, and the kids don't really know why. And so when we ask that question, the kids go blank. Part of the reason that they get that sense of entrapment, because if they do well, if they do get results, and it's very obviously result driven, if they do get results, that's when their parents say, well, since you have the potential, you shouldn't give up. You should keep going. but the kids don't like it and the kids become miserable. And so they're not very intrinsically motivated to continue in their sport. And that's where the problem comes.
So what do you do with kids who, like you say, are in that example, they've grown up in a sport that they might not have, quote unquote, wanted to be in? How do you work with those people to fall in love with that sport or work to a point where they're actually enjoying what they do?
There's a lot of kids who are very extrinsically motivated. They might want to continue in their sport because they might get that college scholarship or they might want to get a good job in the future. I think it's parent education as well. And so sometimes if I notice that this is happening, I might talk with the parent instead and see if there's anything that they can do on their end, create that more motivational climate or environment to be able to help the kids sustain long-term motivation that way.
So would you actually even see a difference? Let's say, for example, there was a kid who grew up playing basketball from the age they were 5. Right. And the parents were like, look, this is what you should do and do nothing else. And they grew up playing that sport as opposed to a kid who plays every kind of sport and then eventually specializes later on. Is there a difference that you see in a kid who specializes early, whether it's pressure from whatever it may be, or specializing late?
This goes to an early specialization in sport topic that a lot of researchers have looked into recently. Most of the elite level athletes in the US, they have found that they did not specialize until they were in their late adolescence periods. So there is technically no relationship between early specialization and long-term athletic success, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Of course, in this part of the world, we always want to start early, but then we end up quitting the sport or dropping out of sport early as well. But that, to me, it sounds like it's not so much a parent concern. They don't really care about what happens later. They're looking for short-term result.
And so I'm guessing the back end of that is there could be a lot of mental health issues that come from that, that stem from that. Did you experience any of that, Camille? Like when you were swimming, did you ever fall out of love and did that create a lot of mental health issues for you?
There was a time though when I started to get better and better that they saw the potential, and I was the kid that always wanted to try other sports. You know, swimming can be quite boring. You're just like swimming back and forth.
Yeah, we can edit this out for your coach. If you don't want us to see it, it's totally fine. We can edit that out.
And I wanted to play basketball and I wanted to do, other things. And there was a time where my dad and my coaches especially would be like, no, you're good at swimming, like swimming, like focus on swimming, only swimming. And it's like, oh, fine. And like there were times where, I would try out for the basketball team, not tell anyone. And then like just the last chance where like I have to commit, then I'd be like, okay, fine, I'll pick swimming. But from a very early age, it taught me that if I wanted to keep going in swimming, like I had to do it for myself. I saw that there were times where I was swimming for other people, in high school where I felt lost. I had to kind of think, why is it that I'm swimming? And when I was able to kind of remember why I wanted to swim, then the rest became much easier. The discipline, the sacrifices, that was all like, oh, it's fine because it's worth it. Yeah.
So finding that solid why, is that something that you find is difficult when you work with your, with your athletes? Just like, what is your why? Is that something that you have to constantly, I don't want to say fight to get an answer for, but like that's your constant, I guess, your challenge?
I don't usually ask the question why to the kid, but in our conversations, I would get a sense that the kid does not know why. It's really about understanding if they're very result driven or understanding if there's other components that make them, keep going in the sport. But what I do find interesting is that, I was actually working with this golfer the other day, and he was telling me that, I'm really scared if I don't get the results, then my parents would be pissed or my coach would be angry at me. It almost feels like, you're playing golf for them and not for yourself.
So how do you change that dynamic?
If the golfer is young, he was only 12. So I would do a parent session or I would do a coach session and see what feedback they're giving, or how do you communicate with the kid? What are some of the best things you would say if the kid plays well? And what are some of the things you would say if the kid doesn't do well? Are we able to work on that?
I'm so intrigued because with these sort of 12-year-old kids, how do they come and find you? Is it the parents that come and finding you saying like, oh, there's something wrong with them?
Right.
Or is it you seeking out these sort of athletes? How does that kind of work?
So they usually find me online, and usually the parent does it if they're young.
Why would they come to find you?
Yeah, well, so they would call and say, well, I want to book an appointment because I think it would be helpful for them to understand the mental game because they lack the confidence, or because they aren't focusing that well, or they're not motivated. I'm hearing all these words like motivation and confidence and focus. And I'm like, yeah, you've come to the right place. But then once I sit down and actually engage with the athlete, there is obviously something more. And it's not just motivation. It's not just confidence. People lack the confidence because of multiple reasons. One is because maybe your coach-athlete relationship isn't that great. One is because maybe your parents are giving you too much stress and stuff like that. So it's about finding what the source of the pressure is that leads up to the lack of confidence or the lack of motivation.
So what makes you the most proud as in your job? Like when you see an athlete do what is like, yes, that's awesome.
I would say that it's not so much the results that they get after, perhaps like meeting with me. It's about them coming back and trusting me in the process. It makes me have that satisfaction in my job. Think.
Camille, we were just sort of talking about it earlier, and you were saying that you've just been in the bubble. Like 2020, to say the least, for a professional athlete has not been the smoothest. How are you doing as an athlete? Like, obviously the Olympics are now moved to 2021, touch wood, that still takes place. How do you adapt as an athlete? How do you maintain your positivity in times when you can't control, certain elements?
Obviously, first the postponement, and then like plans change, like new goals, like all these different things. And then, that kind of gets settled. And then it's like, oh, training access, that changes. And I think what's been hard for me personally is redefining what this next year is going to look like. I think I'm at a different stage maybe than other of my teammates in terms of my goals, in terms of where I'm at, and not letting what other people are doing affect me. And I think sometimes, when I see some teammates are very, focused, very driven, very disciplined, I'm like, oh my God, I need to be that way. Like, I need to do this. And then I'm like, oh, but I really don't want to, but I feel like that's what I need. Feeling comfortable in my decisions is really kind of what I've been struggling with, because everybody in this time is like doing what's best for them. But I really need to listen to that voice and not let what other people are doing influence.
So how important has self-awareness been to your mental health? Because I know you're super open about your mental health and your journey between that. So how important is self-awareness in the correlation to mental health?
Like, very important. I think it's just all about listening to myself. And like, as athletes, we know our physical boundaries, like our limits, we push like very far. Some days, like I'll push until I get injured almost, right? And then I think it's almost taken that, like I will train, but I won't train too far now because I don't want to get injured. I don't want to have to take a week or 2 weeks off of training if I can just step back a bit and then come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think you can think about it the same way mentally, like I'm feeling like I'm swimming, but I'm not enjoying it. Like maybe I just need a mental break, or like I don't feel motivated, instead of pushing and pushing and pushing until like I have like, a breakdown. So I think for me, it's been about finding that balance. And I think that's kind of what happened in the bubble just now. I was like going in like, okay, I'll do 10 days. And then like 41 days later, I'm like, how did I go for so long? And part of it was like, you're with your teammates and it's fun. And then like towards day 30, I was like, okay, this is like a little too long, but I'm going to keep going because like, I have to be strong and I have to be tough and everyone else is doing it. And like, we're in this together. And then like day 41, I was like, I can't do it. And I had to take like 2 weeks off.
Yeah, I get it. It's like in a weird way, like a sleepover. Right? The idea of a sleepover is always great. One day in, you're like, yeah, it's the greatest thing ever. 2 days, and then by the third day, you're like, I need to get home.
Yeah.
At what point did you think, actually, I know what I need to do, and almost going to see a psychologist and being like, that's going to benefit me more than just being in my head?
I have some teammates that like just take diet, for example. They're measuring out their food, like super on top of it. And I'm like, oh my God, should I be doing that? I'm not like that. Like, I really want to just enjoy my food and eat sweets, right? And then you have some people that have like routines before bed where they're doing like an hour stretching, meditation. I'm like, okay, I'll try it. There's things that I've tried because, if it works for other people and they're doing really well, then you're like, okay, let's give it a try. But then I think it's not attaching to like, that's what I need to do. And I think in exploring what other people are doing, then you kind of find what works for you. As I've gotten older and more mature in my sport, I know now the things that work for me and what might not necessarily work.
Yeah. So Karen, when you work with athletes, how, like Camille was saying, everything's so individualized, right? It's so about that person and what they want to do.
Yeah.
How do you find that working with specific athletes who are at the top of their game and then digging in deep with that, individualistic nature of what they're trying to accomplish?
I really like the word exploration. It's really accompanying them on their journey in self-exploration, so to speak. And she was talking about her own story and finding her own thing to do and making her own good decisions. I was actually thinking about a squash athlete that I was recently working with. She's only 14 and she keeps comparing like what she's doing with other squash players. A couple of weeks ago, the squash courts were still closed and there were only like very, very limited squash courts that were open, and whoever gets to go there gets to train. And so she actually did not train for like 10 days or something. And she was really worried because she knows that there's this other squash player who actually had access to that squash court because she lives close by and she knows the people there and stuff like that. So she was really worried because she was scared that she did not have that advantage.
Right.
And so she would use all her energy to think about that squash player. So that was very interesting when we were actually talking about all of this, because she would have her own self-doubts and she would be scared to make her own decisions. Like, is this working for me? Or, if this work out, if I'm not playing squash, if I'm just doing a fitness session with my other fitness coach, is that working? So listening and exploring, and it's really about trial and error. So that journey was very interesting to me and for her as well, I think.
During that exploration process, how much is your role listening, taking in, or as opposed to giving tools like, try this?
We seldom give advice. It's about letting them find and make the best decisions. So it's really about asking good questions, like listening. Of course, active listening is very important in counseling and in psychology. Also, seeing what they feel. For example, it could be asking them, what do you think best works for you? How do you feel after doing this? Or how do you feel doing that? And let them compare and do that comparison by themselves.
It's so interesting because the reason I'm asking that is I'm thinking from a direct correlation to mental health. And when people go to see someone, it's immediately, I need some answers. Like, tell me what to do. Because I don't know what to do. But I think there's something amazing in the fact that, I probably speaking for Camille, but someone that you can dump stuff to, and then you figure your own stuff out. But by having a sounding board is so important. And I think not enough people, whether it's in society or as an athlete, have the ability to, I don't know, I think there's probably a stigma around not having someone that you can speak to. So, I guess for you, Camille, when you've had that opportunity to speak to a psychologist, how much is just having someone who you can dump stuff on without any judgment, or even like to a point, it's almost nice to have them separate from your personal life. Because if you dump that on someone like your better half or your friends, that conversation might come back around a bit later, right? But if you say it to someone like Karen, it's like, okay, I don't have to, now I'm good. Now I can focus on my own life, if you will. So have you found that since you've had a psychologist, you've helped not just with as like your performance, but your mental health?
It was like, okay, if I have a problem, I need to go. And so I kind of waited until there was something like, I'm struggling with motivation. Now's the time to go talk to my sports psychologist. And then maybe a few weeks or a month, like, oh, things are good. And then there'll be something else like, oh, I feel like I'm comparing myself. What I found and what someone was telling me was like, you can't wait until something happens. Like, you need to be more consistent.
I think that's the key. And I think that's the whole point of the topic of sort of enhancing performance, is not waiting until you go, back to zero again. It's sort of like there, and then it's going like, right, now what can I do to gain that edge? Has there been an example, like if you can think of anything, when you've been swimming and you've been in a good place, but something mentally went well, and then all of a sudden, just by mentally being in a better place, you've swum better, or I don't even know if that's a word. So have you swum better? You've swum better through just going into that enhancing performance stage.
There's kind of like a joke with my coach and I now that before a big race, I need to take 10 days of holiday because I'll just swim better. And it's kind of like true, where I think of 2019 Worlds. last year.
Yeah, roughly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was like the big competition of the summer. So I swam like fastest of the season. Usually that's when people take time off. So then I went on holiday for like 10 days, and then we had another competition right after. Here I was like not really having exercised much, but mentally I was in a very good place. And I get up on the blocks, like, I'm like, oh, it's so fun to be here, like swimming and with my teammates, like, we're just going to have fun. And then I swim even faster than I did 10 days ago. And I was like, wow, like, I'm not attaching my identity, my worth to my performance. And then it's just like, wow, you're just having so much fun. It's, when I think about what now, 5 years ago when I was training for the Olympics or trying to qualify for the Olympics, I was like trying so hard to get this A time. It was like, I need to get it. Like, I have to get it. All these words. And my coach was like, I think she could tell that I was like paralyzed by this, need to get it. And she's like, okay, just like, remember why you started swimming. That little girl that just loved being in the water. And I just all of a sudden felt this like weight fall off my shoulder. And it's just like, okay, just have fun. Like, you know what you're doing. You know how to swim. And couple hours later, qualify for the Olympics. I think it's hard to tell somebody this unless they can feel it themselves. And then I think for me, that was the big thing of the aha moment of like, wow, there is so much more outside of just the physical performance that can really give you that boost.
What I find fascinating is just the switch in not being mentally prepared, hindering performance, and being mentally prepared to enhance performance. And it's that switch that we were talking about from the kids being raised in that environment of not having that enhancing performance stage. But once they start teetering over into that, is it about now positive encouragement? Like, you're on the right track now. Now we need to develop more tools to get you into this.
It's really about how the athlete feels. So I would constantly ask how the athletes feel about the sessions. If they feel like they're ready to move on to performance enhancement tools, then that's probably when I would start perhaps exploring what are some of the tools that you would feel comfortable using in your own performance. There usually are underlying issues in the beginning because all the local athletes, most of them anyway, they would feel like, okay, I do have a problem right now. I need to see a sports psychologist. I need to consult with a sports psychologist. And then they would start talking about, okay, there's this lack of motivation. I have anxiety, I have stress, and there's all of that. And then slowly kind of moving on, okay, once we have all of that settled, we can move on to how do I make my performance consistent, or how do I make it even better? And that's probably when some of the tools come in.
What are some tools that you would use with an athlete who's now into that performance enhancing stage?
We would definitely talk about, pre-race routines, like what Camille has mentioned in the beginning. How do I actually have more control over my game? We would be talking about, if your race starts at 9 a.m. in the morning, what are you thinking? What are you feeling at 7 a.m.? What do you want to feel? When you get to the competition venue, what would you want to feel then? And so we would sort of build a schedule going into the game, and we would be talking about the sort of the physical warm-up and also the mental warm-up as well.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah, so exercising the mental muscle and thinking about, okay, I would love to feel at my optimal at 9 a.m. when the race starts. What should I do before that? Or what can I do before that in order to get to that optimal?
And in that sense, do you work with the athlete to find out what they like? Or is it more you telling them, by this point, by 8:30, we want you to be feeling this? Or is it more of a dialogue? I guess
It's definitely a dialogue. So I would want them to feel that this is individualized and what works best for them. So I would be asking questions like, how would you want to feel? Do you want to feel more calm, or do you want to feel more excited, for example? If you want to feel more excited, are we there yet? Or do you feel like some of the things in the past you've done in terms of your routine is not making you feel as excited as you want to be? So then we would work on maybe building in some stuff or some things to do to build up that excitement so that they get into the game ready.
Right. So is there anything that you put into your schedule that you made yourself more ready for performance?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is just listening to myself. Every time I wake up for a competition, I feel different. Now, because I've worked with sports psychologists, because I've been doing this for so long, like I think of it as like I have a toolkit and I can like pick and choose. Like, oh, today I'm feeling like low energy. I need to like get more energy. What does that look like? And then it's like knowing like, okay, I need to be around people that are going to bring up the energy, that are going to make me laugh, that are going to make me the excitement, share the excitement. And then there's times where I'm like so anxious, so nervous, like maybe a really big competition, and I need to like calm down a bit. Meditation, like mindfulness. Now there's all these apps, even just listening to music, having different playlists for my moods.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I think, you know, once you make it individualized, like she said, and you can plan it for as far early. And even there's like the post race. If you have to race the next day, how are you recovering? Like, what are you listening to? Like, what are your parents saying? Like, setting boundaries, like all these things, I think there's a lot, I think, that goes on. And so it takes time to figure out what works well for you. And I think one of the things for me is sometimes like I need to switch off my mind. And I'm like, you know, we talk about tapering the body, like resting the body so that you can perform best. But we also need to taper the mind. And I think like sometimes I'm like overthinking, like I'm visualizing my race like 100 times. And it's like, by the time I get to race, it's like, oh, I've already done it 100 times in my head. Like I'm exhausted. And so it's been like learning about that as well.
So I'm quite fascinated. Has there ever been a time you got into the blocks and you're like, I'm in the money zone right now? Like it's probably taken a while, but like, yes, like I'm here and I've never felt as good. Like I'm almost dangerous with how good I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Have you been there? That must be quite an amazing feeling.
You feel like there's like a bubble around you and like nobody can say anything, do anything that'll interrupt. And you're just like, it's like, I'm feeling myself. I'm ready to go, you know?
Hell yeah.
And then like, I think some of my best races, I like don't even remember the swim, you know? It's like, you're just so like the flow state, like you're just in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then once you find that magical kind of that zone, is it about your preparation, remembering the preparation and remembering, like Karen was saying, the steps of what you need to get to that point, and then having that repetition. So you're like, okay, now I know I need to get to this point so I can feel this way. Mm-hmm. And when I'm in that mood, I'm the best athlete I can possibly be.
Yeah, it's definitely more feeling based. Sometimes it's like you're like, oh, this worked really well last time. So you like latch onto that. Sometimes I like get too attached to things that I do. So I think sometimes it's like letting go. Like it worked this time. It might not work next time.
That's hard though. Superstitions, right?
Yes, exactly. Oh, it's so tricky. Like, you know, what do you do before the block?
Never washing that underwear.
All the time. You know, my lucky socks, all these things.
Yeah.
Right?
But that becomes a ritual and not so much a routine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another difference. Yeah.
There are exact correlations that I think people can understand. We're not just talking about athletic performance to a certain degree, right? It's not just about enhancing your athletic performance. It's about enhancing your own mental performance every day and what you do, which is so important. And I think it's also important to think that people who seem like they have everything together and are in their physical primes, like elite athletes, still need to go and speak to people to help with their mental, because no one is actually doing that enough. Mm-hmm. I mean, right now, the sports world is a lot of people are coming out talking about their mental health, kind of just ending there. What do you think? Do you think it's important that athletes come out more to talk about their mental health and kind of break that stigma, right? We were just talking before saying that people might not come and see you because there's a stigma around there. So how important is it that we're hearing more of these role models talk about their mental health?
I mean, definitely it's very, very, very important and necessary for the athletes to come out, and coaches as well, and parents. There's definitely a triangular relationship there. Extremely important because we can only do so much as a role, you know, as in our sports psych role. They have to talk about this like it's something that they can do every day to enhance performance. So if you go to a nutritionist, you would definitely say, oh, you know, it's fine. You know, it doesn't mean that you're obese or that you're, you know, that you just want to, you know, stay fit. And that's why you go to a nutritionist. You know, you go to a physio, not because, you know, you have an injury, but you can talk about it because you want to recover faster. And it should be the same with psychology. Like you want to enhance your performance. It's not so much you have a problem and that's why, you know, you see it as a weakness and you're scared to talk about it. It should be something that you should be proud of talking about.
Yeah, we were just talking when the cameras were off, but that whole aspect of as an athlete, you want to have an edge over everybody. And if by seeing a psychologist gives me that edge to perform, like why wouldn't you go and do that? I think everyone should be doing that in everyday life, right? If it gives me an edge to work better, to sleep better, so I can perform better when I'm my game day, which is, I don't know, it could be someone who's a doctor or, someone who's at work. If they can perform better by seeing people that can help them perform better, like why wouldn't you do it, right? So it's such an interesting topic. I think we can always talk more about, but I want to say thank you for joining us. It's amazing to have you. I think for people who want to see you, how can people come and find you? Like how would someone say, I need to speak to Karen Lowe right now. I'm so juiced and my athletic performance is going to be increased this much. Where would they come and find you?
You could find me on Google. My company is Inner Edge. So I am, founding director of Hong Kong-based sports psychology, a sport and performance psychology consulting company.
Amazing.
So you can definitely find me there.
Find there. And then Camille, hopefully we can find you swimming in the Olympics.
Yes, next year.
Next year. Hopefully.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about that. How's that all going, and where can people track you? And
you can follow my journey on my social media. I do try to share an authentic picture of what it means to be an athlete, which includes like the good stuff and the maybe not so pretty stuff. The goal is still Tokyo 2021. And so that's really what the bigger goal is. And then, taking it step by step until then.
Amazing. Yeah. So I think finally the best thing is just to be authentic, get the help that you need to see, not just to think about getting back to zero, but enhancing your performance, which is what it's all about. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you guys for joining us. It's such a pleasure to share your wisdom and your time. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.